The sun hung low in the sky, a glaring orange orb that cast long shadows across the parched earth. Drought had long since stripped the land of its vitality, leaving behind a cracked expanse that mirrored the hollow ache in Clara's chest. She stood in the dust-laden yard of her family homestead, hands on her hips, staring out at the wilting corn stalks that had once flourished under her late husband's care. Each day had become a battle against despair, a constant reminder of what had been lost to both time and calamity. The absence of his laughter haunted the silence, echoing against the failing walls of the farmhouse. Her fingers twitched, aching for the comfort of work, yet the farm offered little now. The barn loomed like a ghost behind her, its wooden beams creaking with a weariness that matched her own. Clara closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath that filled her lungs with the dry scent of dust and decay. The weight of debt pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket, suffocating her spirit. It was a burden she carried alone, the kind of weight that pressed into her soul and crumbled any semblance of hope. The bank's reminders had grown more persistent, threatening to strip away the very roots of her existence. The auction was a last resort, a fading ember of desperation she hardly wanted to entertain. Clara had been there before, standing in the throng of townsfolk, eyes downcast as her possessions passed from hand to hand, her world inching closer to collapse. She thought of how the townspeople would cast sidelong glances, their whispers thick with pity and judgment. It stung, yet she was determined to disregard their opinions as she picked her way through the crowd, her heart racing as she approached the auctioneer's stand. Today, there was a different kind of desperation in the air, a pulse of urgency that permeated the atmosphere. When the auctioneer called for bids on a figure draped in a burlap sack, Clara felt an inexplicable tug at her heart. The man stood still, seemingly resigned to his fate. Clenching her jaw, she raised her hand, her voice hoarse as she made the first offer, a mere $2, an amount so small that it drew laughter from the crowd. Yet in that moment, Clara felt the stirrings of something long buried within her, a defiance against a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Silence fell over the assembled townsfolk, their laughter dying on their lips as the auctioneer's gavel struck, sealing the man's fate. As she led him away from the crowd, she caught a glimpse of his eyes, dark and penetrating, even through the fabric of the sack. He seemed both bewildered and resolute, an echo of her own turmoil. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the wind that swept through the empty fields. Slowly, the sack was lifted from his head, revealing a chiseled face adorned with scars that told stories of battles fought and lost. "They call me Koa," he replied, his voice rough yet surprisingly calm. In that moment, something shifted between them, a fragile connection born from shared loss and the instinct to survive. Clara felt a flush of warmth against the coldness of her reality. The world around her had been stripped bare, yet here was a man, a warrior, standing at her side, raw and restored in a way she had not anticipated. They stood together against the backdrop of a dying land, the weight of her decisions now manifesting in a tangible way. The unlikeliest of choices bloomed between them, a fragile seed of hope in a desert of despair. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt the first tremors of change stirring within her, an unexpected promise carried on the wings of uncertainty. Clara stood at the edge of the dust-laden yard, the weight of Koa's presence a strange comfort amidst the swirling uncertainties of her life. The townsfolk, with their murmurs of disbelief and cautious glances, were a blend of curiosity and suspicion, their distrust palpable. The shadows stretched longer with the setting sun, intertwining their fates in a tender and tenuous way. Koa, still silent, bore the weight of their scorn like a soldier returning from battle, his posture relaxed but tense, a coiled spring waiting to unleash its energy. As they walked back to the homestead together, Clara noticed how the townspeople shifted, their bodies tightening as Koa approached. The familiar faces that once shared laughter with her now turned cold, molded by tales of violence and vengeance that had swept through the town like a dust storm. Whispers followed them, sharp and biting, accusing Koa of being a menace, a fugitive with a past painted in shades of blood and betrayal. Clara clenched her jaw, stifling the swirling doubts within. Here, beneath the weight of her own despair, she had dared to reach out, and the world wanted to draw her back into shadow. Koa walked beside her, his movements deliberate yet burdened. Clara could see scars tracing the contours of his hands, the kind that spoke of survival and hardship. Each step they took seemed to echo the uncertainty of her choice, a choice that had drawn her away from the familiar chains of her past and into uncharted territory. His eyes roamed over her homestead, taking in the dilapidated barns and the wilting cornstalks, a mirror of his own beaten heart. He held a gravity that pulled her towards him, drawing her from the brink of despair, yet she could not shake the reservations that clung to her like dust. Once inside, Clara gestured for him to sit at the rough-hewn table, the last vestige of warmth in a home that felt devoid of life. She placed a simple meal before him, a meager offering that mirrored her own empty stomach and restless heart. Koa accepted the food with a quiet gratitude, and they shared the silence as the sun spilled its last light through the grimy windows, casting a soft glow over their weary faces. Their simple meal became an unspoken communion, a momentary reprieve from the weight of judgment that awaited them outside. But Clara couldn't shake the nagging doubts. She recalled the stories that had gripped the town, tales of raids and revenge, spun from threads of fear woven into her very existence. She watched Koa as he ate, the muscles in his jaw flexing with each bite, an unyielding challenge against the disdain that lingered like a storm cloud overhead. The man she had liberated from his burlap prison was also a prisoner of his own past, shackled by the perceptions of a world that had never understood him. She felt the war within her heart aching for the hope he offered, while her mind warned her of the chaos he could bring. As the evening deepened, the shadows in the room grew longer. Clara found herself lost in the depths of Koa's eyes, the firelight reflecting in their dark pools. He was a mystery, wrapped in silence, a testament to all she had lost and all that still lay ahead. Despite the barriers that loomed between them, an unspoken understanding flickered in the space they shared. They were both warriors, each battling their own demons, yearning for a way through the darkness that loomed outside, bound by choice, yet divided by circumstance. In that hushed moment, Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. Hope was an ember, fragile but insistent, igniting a flicker of purpose within her weary spirit. They were two broken souls standing against the tide of judgment and rumor, uniting in their shared loneliness, and perhaps finding solace in the recognition of their pain. This was not a love story, not yet, but it was the beginning of a bond forged in the dust of a desolate land, a promise resting on the precipice of a new dawn. If only they could survive the night. The heavy air inside the farmhouse thickened with unspoken tension as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out of time itself. Clara and Koa sat across from each other, the weight of their choices hanging palpably in the stillness. The familiar creaking of the old wooden boards reverberated through the silent room, each groan echoing Clara's inner turmoil as she wrestled with the repercussions of her impulsive act of compassion. She had reached out, pulled Koa from the abyss of judgment, and in doing so crafted a fragile lifeline that both frightened and exhilarated her. Koa, however, bore the stillness like a soldier waiting for the next shot to be fired. He lifted his gaze from his plate to meet Clara's, a flicker of understanding passing between them, a bond struck in the firelight, fragile yet radiant. She watched as his scarred hands moved with surprising gentleness, the same hands that bore the weight of a past she could only glimpse. Each bite he took seemed to carry the weight of her town's disdain, and yet there was a quiet dignity in his actions. a reminder that survival triumphed over judgment. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. Her heart, once weighed down by despair, began to ache with a different kind of uncertainty, a yearning for connection laced with the fear of missteps. Outside, the whispers of the townsfolk fluttered through the evening air, their judgments like arrows fired at her back. Clara could almost hear their scorn, accusing her of irrationality, of foolishness for intertwining her fate with a man whose past was steeped in shadows. But as she looked across the table, she saw not just the physical form of Koa, but the embodiment of resilience, a spirit scarred yet still standing. The laughter of yesterday felt far distant now, replaced by a stark reality, a reckoning that Clara had chosen not to face alone. The world outside saw Koa as a threat. She saw him as a chance for redemption, not just for herself, but perhaps for him too. Koa's eyes lingered on Clara, and she sensed his questioning of her decision, the vulnerability creeping into his expression like dawn breaking over the horizon. There was a quiet desperation in her own heart, a wish for something more than survival, to forge a connection that transcended the weight of their respective burdens. Clara pushed aside the remnants of her meal, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the scarred wood of the table. The act was intentional, a silent invitation to Koa, to share not just the meal, but also the uncharted territory of their broken lives. She wanted him to know that he was more than a decision born of desperation. He was a thread in the tapestry she had yet to weave. With the last rays of sunlight fading, Koa finally spoke again, his voice a gravelly whisper that hung in the air between them. Clara leaned closer, drawn in by the gravity of his words, his past mixing with her present in a way that could not be undone. In that hushed exchange, they began to explore their unspoken fears and the possibility of hope, a tentative dance around the shattered remnants of their lives. Clara felt the flicker of resolve ignite once more, pushing back against the doubts that crept in like the chill of night. As darkness enveloped the day, Clara stood, clearing the remnants of their meal with a newfound purpose. The shadows that lingered outside her homestead were still thick and foreboding, yet within these four walls, she felt a flicker of defiance. Whatever lay ahead, she was prepared to face it side by side with Koa, an unlikeliest alliance born from a moment of boldness. They were two souls navigating the darkness, drawn together in ways that defied the whispers and scorn of the outside world. Uncertainty remained their only companion, yet in the quiet sanctuary of the farmhouse, amidst the dust and decay, hope began to blossom, fragile yet unwavering as the first stars appeared in the vast, starlit sky. As dawn broke over the homestead, a delicate light seeped through the grimy windows, illuminating the kitchen with muted hues of gold. Clara stirred from a restless sleep, her eyes tracing the contours of Koa's silhouette as he stood outside, framed against the backdrop of the wilting fields. Clad in the tattered remnants of his burlap sack, he seemed at once a part of the land and yet wholly separate, a figure of quiet strength amidst the encroaching despair. The morning air hung thick with the aromas of earth and dust, and Clara felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as she watched him work. Koa knelt low, fingers deftly sifting through the cracked soil. The gesture was simple, yet there was an intensity in the way he pressed his hands into the earth, as if coaxing life from its parched depths. Clara grabbed her apron, feeling a profound curiosity breathe life into her mundane routine. Each day since she had brought him home had whispered of an unspoken partnership, a chance to reshape the fate that hung heavily over them both. She joined him, her heart racing with the thrill of possibility, yet the weight of the town's judgment loomed large in her mind. The days blended into one another, punctuated by Koa's quiet presence which shifted the atmosphere around the farmhouse. The townsfolk continued to gawk and murmur, their eyes narrowing as they gauged their connection with suspicion. But Clara observed Koa closely and found solace in his rhythm. He worked tirelessly, hauling water from the well, mending the barn's weather-beaten roof, and even clearing the weeds that strangled the remains of her husband's once thriving garden. In every action, he revealed a depth that contradicted the tales of violence. One afternoon, as Clara sliced potatoes for supper, she caught sight of Koa in the fading light, his form silhouetted against the amber sky. He was carrying an old, rusted plough that had long since been abandoned. In that moment, she felt a pang of gratitude that shattered the tension held in her chest. Koa's resolve spoke volumes. Each bead of sweat that trickled down his brow seemed to erase whispers of doubt, sowing seeds of resilience. The quiet strength he exuded enveloped her, promising something more than survival, yet the weight of disapproval from the town pressed ever more heavily on Clara's shoulders. She still felt their eyes upon her whenever she ventured to town for supplies, their whispers wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. Even so, every evening Koa returned to the farmhouse, and with him came a sense of grounding, a reminder that, despite their circumstances, they had created a refuge amidst the chaos. Their shared silence, their tentative, unhurried exchanges brought a certain peace, one that transcended the silence of the nights, filled with the echoes of her past. Still, the shadows of doubt lingered, and as Clara lay beneath the familiar weight of worn blankets, she often caught glimpses of Koa in her dreams. His dark eyes haunted her nights, holding fragments of both pain and resilience. Each night was a silent negotiation between her burgeoning feelings and the clamor of her fears. But morning always arrived with clarity, a reminder that they had forged something beautiful from the ashes of despair. What they were building, amidst the biting commentary and watchful gazes, felt closer to something honest. Perhaps within the walls of their dilapidated home, the power of connection could bloom anew, leading them from the shadows and into the warmth of something long forgotten, a future entwined in hope, whispering of the possibilities nestled between them. The sun hung high overhead, casting unforgiving rays across the parched soil that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Clara moved about the homestead, her hands busy with chores, her mind a swirling tempest of thoughts. Koa was outside, tending to the small patch of land that already began to show signs of life under his diligent care. She stole glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, his strong form silhouetted against the backdrop of the wilting fields, determination etched into every line of his face. It was in these moments that Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth blossoming in her chest, a gentle push against the walls she had built around her heart. That afternoon, the stillness was punctuated by a muffled whimpering sound coming from the barn. Clara paused, her hands frozen mid-task, as the sound pulled her attention away from Koa. Curiosity piqued, she walked toward the barn, her footsteps muted by the dust that consumed the ground. As she approached, she noticed Koa crouched beside a small, trembling creature, a stray dog, ribs protruding sharply against its thin skin, eyes wide and pleading. The animal seemed terrified, its body shaking as Koa whispered soft sounds, coaxing it to trust him. Clara held her breath, watching as Koa's strong hands, once associated with battle and survival, now reached out with a gentleness that surprised her. He moved slowly as if approaching a skittish horse, his voice low and soothing against the backdrop of silence. "It's okay," he murmured, his tone rich with empathy. "You're safe now." Clara felt something shift within her, an understanding that transcended words. In that moment, Koa was not just the burden of expectation or the fear of scandal. He was a man burdened by his own past, yet compelled to seek redemption in small, kind acts. As the stray inched closer, Koa's eyes glimmered with a vulnerability she had not yet witnessed. Clara noticed the way his throat tightened, and she could see the glistening of tears pooling at the edges of his eyes. It was a raw display, one that spoke of a depth of feeling that had been hidden beneath his exterior, a warrior unearthing a sliver of tenderness. Clara's heart lurched. She felt the tremors of his emotion resonate with her own hidden grief. In their shared silence, the pain of their pasts hung heavy, yet the air crackled with a renewed sense of possibility, a bridge of trust beginning to form between them. Koa gently reached out, scratching the dog behind its ears, and Clara forced her way through the knot in her throat to join him, kneeling beside the two of them. She watched as Koa comforted the creature, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding. The world outside melted away, leaving only the warmth that hummed between them, nourished by shared vulnerability. The act of compassion, of nurturing life, felt like a small revolution, each paw that Koa caressed, each soft word he uttered, dismantling the barriers forged by doubt and judgment. Slowly, the stray began to respond, inching closer until it nestled against Koa's side, seeking solace. Clara could see the moment of trust solidified, the soft whimpering quieted, replaced by a gentle sigh as the dog finally relaxed into Koa's presence. It was a testament to the power of connection, a reminder that strength could also manifest in acts of kindness. Clara marveled at the sight, a flicker of hope igniting once more within her heart, silently recognizing the depth of Koa's compassion that mirrored her own buried desires for connection and belonging. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the barn, Clara felt something shift inside her, a determination to follow the path toward understanding and trust. The bond forming between them was fragile but resilient, marked by shared moments that revealed the essence of their humanity, buried beneath the weight of their respective burdens. In each other, they discovered an unspoken promise, the possibility of healing through the simple act of caring for something lost, and perhaps, amidst the shadows of their lives, they might find their way back to the light. The sun climbed higher into the sky, illuminating the remnants of the old fence that surrounded the homestead. Clara stood with her arms crossed, watching Koa as he assessed the long-neglected structure, the weathered wood sagging under years of abandonment. She felt the heaviness of her past in every splintered beam, a reminder that her husband had once walked these grounds, lending strength to what had now turned to dust. But Koa, with the resolute gaze of a man who had faced adversity, approached the task with a determination that ignited something within her, a flicker of hope she thought had long since extinguished. With precise movements, Koa began his work. He started by pulling up the rotting posts, his hands moving deftly despite the years of hardship etched into his skin. Clara's heart quickened at the sight. She had not anticipated how a simple act of repair could rekindle her spirit. Every thud of the post as it struck the earth resonated within her, echoing an unspoken promise of renewal. There was something transformative in witnessing Koa's labor, in the way he approached the task as if mending more than just wood, but the very fabric of their lives intertwined in the dust and grit of the farmhouse. As the day wore on, the two of them worked side by side, Clara occasionally lifting her gaze to Koa, his brow furrowed in concentration. With each piece of wood he replaced, there was a shift, not only in the fence itself but in the air that surrounded them, heavy with unspoken words but lightened by a shared endeavor. The power dynamic between them began to blur. Clara found herself leaning into Koa's presence, his quiet strength bolstering her own resolve. The townsfolk's whispers felt distant, fading against the hum of new beginnings. She could see Koa transforming the landscape before her, carving out a sanctuary from the desolation that had loomed over her heart for so long. Their work continued until the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the newly restored fence. Clara's pulse quickened at the sight of it. The straight lines and sturdy posts stood testament to their effort. Koa stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow, and Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. He turned to her, a hint of a smile breaking the stoic mask he often wore. In that fleeting moment, she sensed a shift, an unspoken understanding that they were not merely two broken souls inhabiting the same space, but partners forging a path forth together. As the twilight faded into night, Clara found herself moved by a sense of belonging she had not felt in years. The garden, once a monument to her husband's memory, transformed into a canvas for their joint efforts. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Koa's as he set down his tools. The warmth of that connection ignited a small glow against the chill of the evening air. They stood there, the tension of the day dissipated, filled with the quiet thrill of what lay ahead, united in their shared hopes and burdens. For the first time since Koa had arrived, she felt the weight of her past begin to lift. The act of repair was a tangible representation of their bond, a testament to the strength they could find in one another. Clara sensed their lives intertwining, the boundaries once sharply defined now blurring into something new, something alive. The promise of tomorrow shimmered on the horizon, and she embraced it, standing shoulder to shoulder with a man her heart yearned to understand, ready to face the world beyond the farm, together. As the sun rose on a new day, Clara moved through the small homestead with a rhythm that had become familiar since Koa's arrival. The faint scent of coffee mingled with the earthy aroma of the freshly tilled soil outside. She glanced out the window, watching as Koa worked diligently on the fence, his rugged hands deftly weaving new posts into place. There was something comforting in the sight of him, strong and resolute, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had once engulfed her life. But the calmness of the morning was short-lived, as her eyes fell upon a small, weathered box resting on the shelf near the fireplace. Its presence, obscured by dust, stirred a maelstrom of memories that had remained buried for too long. Clara felt the pull of the past, an object heavy with too many stories, too many emotions she had chosen to stow away. She hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing upon her. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the room, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cool surface of the box. With a quiet determination, she lifted it down, the creaking wood echoing in the stillness of the morning. As she opened it, the familiar scent of old leather and faded pages wafted up to meet her, and in that moment, she was transported back to another time, the days when laughter filled this house, when Tom had been alive, and every corner of their homestead echoed with joy. For a moment, the seams of her heart threatened to unravel, memories swirling like dust motes in the sunbeams streaming through the window. Inside the box lay a collection of letters, neatly stacked and tied with a string. They were letters from Tom, penned during his time away, his words laced with longing and love. Clara's heart clenched as she remembered the feel of his hands gripping hers, the warmth of his laughter spilling into the air. But deeper still, nestled among the letters, was an old photograph, a black and white image of Tom in his uniform, a proud smile lighting up his face. Scars ran deep in Clara. It was a visual reminder of the war that had taken him away and left her alone, a widow in a world that had turned unforgiving. As she held the photograph, a surge of emotion gripped her. The memory of that day, the last day they had shared, clawed its way into her mind. Tom had shown her that very picture, his eyes bright with the promise of a future that had been snatched away like the land's bounty under a relentless drought. Clara felt a familiar ache in her chest, a reminder of the deep love they had shared, intertwined with the bitterness of loss. She traced her fingers over the photograph, the worn surface a map of the life she had once known. Feeling the fragile thread that connected her to the past, suddenly the sound of a hammer striking wood jolted her back into the present. Clara turned and caught sight of Koa, immersed in his work, his brow glistening with sweat. As she looked back down at the photograph, something stirred within her. A twinge of understanding mingled with the sorrow she had buried so deeply. Koa was a warrior too, battling demons she could only begin to fathom. The scars that marred his body spoke of past horrors, echoes of battles fought in different lands, and yet here he was, alive and breathing, offering a sense of companionship she had not realized she had craved. Clara wiped her eyes, taking a steadying breath as she placed the photograph back into the box with soft reverence. The memories were bittersweet, but they also held a promise. In Koa's presence, amidst the remnants of her own past, she felt a glimmer of hope, evidence that perhaps healing was possible. One warrior's story intertwined with another's, carving pathways through their shared trauma. With the sun now casting golden rays across the land, illuminating the dust that still hung in the air, Clara stepped out of the shadow of her past and into the light of possibility. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting sharp shadows that clung to the ground like memories refusing to fade. Clara stood at the edge of the newly repaired fence, her heart heavy with unspoken words. Koa's back was turned to her as he straightened up from the ground, pulling a stubborn weed from the earth, but she could feel the distance between them expanding like an unforgiving chasm. The remnants of her husband's laughter echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of a love that once filled these very spaces with warmth. She inhaled deeply, steeling herself against the tender ache that threatened to consume her thoughts. "Do you ever plan to talk about it?" Clara's voice rang out, sharp and questioning, slicing through the heavy stillness. The words hung in the air, raw and unyielding, a challenge thrown into the vast expanse surrounding them. Koa paused, the weed still clutched in his hand, his silence a heavy weight that pressed down on the simmering tension. He didn't turn to face her, but she could sense the shift within him, the tightened muscles of his shoulders straining against the unspoken burden he carried. For a moment, the world fell away, leaving only the two of them, two broken souls caught in the riptide of their pasts. As if responding to an unvoiced understanding, Koa dropped the weed and moved slowly, deliberately, toward the barn. Clara's breath quickened. She watched him retreat, a silent confrontation that ignited a blend of frustration and fear within her. Was he leaving her to drown in the weight of her uncertainties, or was he choosing the solitude of his own demons over the shared burden of their existence? The questions churned in her mind, but the answer eluded her as Koa stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind him. Moments stretched into minutes, and Clara felt the pulse of her heart quicken. She followed him, her feet guided by an instinct that whispered of connection, a need to break through the silence that had settled like dust around them. As she crossed the threshold, the dim light within the barn revealed Koa's figure, framed by the shadows as he rummaged through a pile of old tools. Her heart stuttered at the sudden sight of him. There was a rawness in his concentration, a depth in his actions that spoke volumes beyond mere words. Finally, Koa emerged, his hands cradling a length of weathered rope. He held it up, letting its fibers dangle in the air between them, a tangible representation of something deeper that lay beneath their strife. Clara's breath caught as he stepped closer, the rope resting upon his calloused palms, an invitation wrapped in vulnerability. The gesture rendered her speechless, for it was not merely a rope, it was a lifeline, a reminder that they were both tied by the complexities of their past choices, connected through shared fears and unyielding hopes. He was not just the scarred warrior she had taken home. He was a man seeking to embrace a future, even when his past loomed large. Clara's heart swelled within her, her walls beginning to crumble as she recognized the profound meaning in his silence. Koa wasn't turning away. He was offering her a piece of himself, a glimpse of the strength behind the scars that marred his skin. With cautious resolve, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough fibers of the rope, anchoring her own quiet turmoil. The bond that tethered them felt palpable then, as if this simple act had woven their lives into an intricate tapestry, stitched together with threads of pain and possibility. In that suspended moment, Clara understood that Koa did not need to explain his past. It was etched in every line of his face, revealed in each motion he made. And as she stood before him, with the weight of their shared silence heavy in the air, She felt the stirrings of something fragile and beautiful begin to take root, a trust forged in the crucible of their struggles, bound tightly by the understanding that neither would have to face the darkness alone. They were two warriors, each bearing their scars, yet finding strength in their courage to confront the unknown together. The sun dipped low on the horizon, drenching the land in hues of crimson and gold, yet an ominous tension crept into the stillness of the homestead. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, her heart racing as she caught sight of figures emerging from the dust-laden road. They were entrenched in conversation, their voices muted but hushed enough to ignite alarm within her chest. She turned her gaze towards Koa, who was standing in the barn, the rope still coiled in his hands, his focus unwavering as he worked. The peacefulness of their labor felt like a distant memory, an illusion swiftly shattered by the arrival of newcomers. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she squinted against the fading light, trying to discern the intentions of those approaching. Their silhouettes sharpened, revealing the unmistakable badges of lawmen, men who had devoted their lives to upholding a code that felt increasingly foreign within her own heart. The fear crept into her bones, and she felt the weight of her choices pressing down upon her. With a sudden urgency, she stepped inside the barn, her voice trembling as she called to Koa. "We have to go, now." Koa looked up at her, confusion flickering across his face. But the tension in her voice cut through the air like a knife, and instinctively he dropped the rope, the rough fibers falling to the ground as he approached her side. Clara felt a wave of urgency wash over them, compounding the unspoken bond they had formed. In this moment, they were not merely two souls, woven together by circumstance. They were allies, partners bound by the necessity of survival. Clara's heart thudded in her chest as she reached for his hand, a silent plea that spoke volumes in the wake of the encroaching threat. As they slipped out of the barn and crept toward the far side of the homestead, Clara's mind raced with thoughts of her precarious situation. The presence of the lawmen spelled danger, not just for Koa, but for her as well. A potential unraveling of the fragile world they had begun to build together. The whispers and judgments of the townsfolk felt infinitely small in that moment, shadows fading beneath the weight of her growing resolve. They shared a purpose now, a need to protect what little had been salvaged from the wreckage of their pasts. Yet as they moved, Clara felt the sharp edges of uncertainty nip at her heels. Koa's hand tightened around hers as they navigated the tall grass that separated them from the approaching lawman. The horizon glimmered with the last vestiges of sunlight, illuminating the path ahead while leaving the shadows long and threatening. Clara glanced up at him, his expression a mixture of defiance and calm, the scars on his face catching the dying light. She could sense the whirlwind of emotions simmering beneath the surface, a shared vulnerability that magnified the sense of urgency between them. Koa was not merely a man with a troubled past. He was her anchor against the approaching storm. Just then, a shout broke the silence, slicing through the warm evening air. "Koa!" The voice was sharp, edged with authority, and Clara's heart sank. It was the unmistakable voice of the local sheriff, riding at the head of the small group of lawmen, riding hard towards them. Panic surged through her veins, igniting an instinctual flight response that threatened to overtake her rational thoughts. They were exposed, and every fiber of her being screamed for them to move, to slip away into the embrace of the encroaching dusk. But where could they go? The boundaries of her homestead felt increasingly confining, the weight of the law closing in around them like a noose tightening at the throat. Clara turned to Koa, her breath hitching as she faced the reality of her choices. "You need to go. I'll hold them off. I can stall them until you're far enough away." The desperation in her voice was palpable, a mixture of determination and fear. But as she spoke, she saw Koa's eyes harden, those dark pools of depth and resolve that had drawn her in. He shook his head ever so slightly, the silent protest burning brightly in the space between them. They were intertwined now, not just in choice, but in fate, and neither of them could face the swirling chaos alone. As the lawmen advanced, the two stood at the precipice of a decision that would shape the course of their lives irrevocably. Koa stood resolute beside Clara, their hands still clasped together as the shadows of the lawmen crept closer, the urgency of the situation igniting a primal instinct within them both. The tether forged through shared vulnerability resonated between them, and in that charged silence, something deep and unspoken flickered to life, a pact formed in the crucible of their tumultuous circumstances. Clara could feel the weight of Koa's past pressing down upon her, yet the warmth of his presence ignited an unwavering determination within her. She had chosen to stand by him, to battle against the world that sought to pull them apart, and with that decision came an unyielding loyalty that swept away any remnants of suspicion. As the sheriff and his men approached, Clara tightened her grip on Koa's hand, the gesture conveying more than words ever could. It was a promise, a silent declaration that they were no longer alone in their struggles, that her heart had opened to the possibility of unity even amid chaos. Koa's gaze shifted from her hand to the approaching riders, his expression unflinching yet tinged with gratitude. He understood the risk she was taking, the weight of her choice resting heavily on her shoulders, and in that moment, their fates became entwined, an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of shared hardship. The sheriff reined his horse to a halt, his eyes narrowing as they fell upon Koa. "He's a danger to you, Clara. You don't know what you're getting into." The man's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and accusatory, yet Clara felt the truth of her feelings swell within her, drowning out the sheriff's concerns. She took a step forward, placing herself between Koa and the approaching figures, her heart pounding with defiance. "He's not what you think," she declared, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around them. "He's fought battles you'll never understand. He's worth fighting for." Koa shifted behind her, a quiet strength emanating from his stillness, and Clara sensed the power of his resolve solidifying behind her. Together, they formed a wall against the encroaching scrutiny of the town, and she felt that silent devotion swell between them, unvoiced but palpable. The sheriff's brow furrowed, confusion battling with disbelief as he scrutinized their connection. Clara met his gaze head-on, unyielding in her defense, her heart a wild drum echoing the depth of her commitment. The townsfolk had long since forgotten the essence of loyalty that could grow in the spaces between despair and hope, yet she was determined to remind them, even if it meant standing against the very laws meant to protect her. Time stretched as the sheriff hesitated, weighing the murmurings of his squad behind him, their curiosity replacing judgment for the moment. The air thickened with tension, a standoff that held the weight of unspoken truths and unacknowledged fears. Koa remained poised beside her, his presence a steadfast anchor as they braced themselves for the fallout. Neither of them flinched at the scrutiny. They had already gambled against fate and found each other in the aftermath of that gamble. Loyalty grew from the ashes of suspicion, and they faced the lawmen together, an unshakable testimony to their united front. With a deep breath, Clara stepped back, allowing the sheriff to scrutinize her choice. The wind caught her hair, swirling around her like a protective veil. The raw, unfiltered love for Koa blooming silently in her chest. She sensed Koa moving slightly closer, a silent affirmation of her stance, and in that moment, both felt the weight of their unspoken commitment resonate between them, binding them in a shared resolve. They were two warriors standing on the front line, willing to face the storm, forging ahead in a world that had sought to define them, but would never hold them captive again. The shadows of judgment might linger, but together they were crafting a light that refused to be dimmed. The tension in the air crackled as Clara faced the sheriff, her heart pounding in her chest, while Koa stood solid beside her, a silent fortress. The lawman's scrutiny was a weight that settled heavily on them, pressing the air thin with unasked questions and judgments. It was in this charged silence that Koa's mind turned inward, his memories swirling like dust caught in the fading light. His past bore the marks of both valor and shame, a tale woven from the fabric of survival and sacrifice. Koa had once served under the banner of his people, a warrior against forces that sought to erase the very essence of his existence. He had fought for the land, the kinship of his tribe, yet the cost was steep, marked not only by physical wounds, but by wounds that ran far deeper. In the chaos of battle, when the smoke of gunfire blurred the lines between friend and foe, he had made choices that haunted him still. The cries of those left behind echoed in his heart, and the blood of innocents stained his hands in the name of survival. Decisions forced upon him by a world that saw only the warrior, not the man behind the scars. When Koa returned from the war, the land he loved lay fractured, a ghost town of memories overshadowed by betrayal from those he had once trusted. The government's promises had unraveled like a thread pulled from the very fabric of his life. He had witnessed injustice, done not just to his people, but to those who dared to stand in solidarity. Outraged, he had taken up arms against a corrupt system, committed acts that bore the weight of necessary crime. It was a bitter choice, revenge overshadowed by the loss of freedom, leaving him adrift in the aftermath, a fugitive among the very people he had fought to protect. Yet amidst the wreckage of his choices, there had been a flicker of hope. In the heat of that turmoil, he had saved a child, a young girl trapped in the crossfire, her innocent life threatened by the chaos he had known too well. Koa had scooped her up from the ground, carrying her to safety even as bullets whistled through the air. It was a singular moment that had anchored him to the embers of his humanity, yet the act of rescue only deepened his burden. For every life he saved, there were countless others lost, the faces of those he could not protect haunting his every step. This was the truth behind his silence, the weight of his choices etched into the lines of his face, a confession unspoken. Koa stood steadfast beside Clara, the shadows around them whispering the stories he dared not voice. He had learned to carry the burdens of guilt alone, the echoes of his past binding him in ways she could not yet understand. How could he explain the depths of his shame and the chasm of regret that threatened to swallow him whole? Every glance at Clara, every flicker of connection filled him with a longing to transcend the silence that surrounded him, yet the scars of his history anchored him in unshareable darkness. As the sheriff continued to assess the tension between them, Koa felt the weight of Clara's loyalty beside him, a flickering flame against the encroaching shadows. He appreciated the strength of her presence, an unexpected balm that soothed his fractured spirit in ways he had not anticipated. In her gaze, he saw a reflection of his own struggle, the desire to break free from the chains of the past that held them both captive. He could feel the silent resolve between them deepening, an unspoken understanding that transcended the judgment surrounding them. They were two souls caught in a storm, yet within the storm lay the possibility of redemption. In that moment of intensity, Koa took a deep breath, a silent vow echoing within the confines of his heart. He would fight not just for his own freedom, but for Clara's as well, a promise forged in the fire of understanding, honoring the fragility of the connection they had begun to build. Together, they would carve a path through the shadows of their pasts, illuminated by the enduring light of loyalty, their hearts intertwined amidst the chaos, offering the strength to face whatever lay ahead, side by side. The stillness in the air thickened as the sheriff's voice echoed in the tension-filled space between Clara and Koa. They stood united, yet within Koa's gaze flickered the instinct to flee, a warrior's instinct honed by years of survival. He could feel the heat of judgment surrounding them, the whispers of uncertainty and suspicion creeping closer, and a primal urge urged him to protect her, to shield Clara from the fallout of his past. The moment stretched, a fragile tether pulling taut in the silence, the world around them fading into insignificance as he weighed the consequences of their shared defiance. Clara sensed the turmoil swirling within him, the muscle of his jaw tightening as he contemplated the even darker shadows lurking beyond the horizon. She took a step forward, her heart pounding with urgency and resolve. "You can't just walk away, Koa," she declared, her voice resonating with the force of the storm swirling outside. "If you leave now, you'll be running from the very thing we fought for together." The sheriff's gaze flickered toward her, confusion evident in his eyes. Yet her focus remained unwavering, locked onto the man who had drawn her from despair into a realm of hope. Koa shifted, the weight of his past pressuring down like the suffocating heat of the afternoon sun, and Clara felt a surge of determination swell within her. "I'm not asking you to save me," she implored, her voice thick with emotion. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." Clara's steady resolve wrapped around him, igniting a flicker of warmth against the cold shadows of his fear. The lawman's presence loomed large, but Clara's unwavering spirit forged a shield between them, a testament to their unbreakable bond in the face of adversity. She saw the conflict flicker in Koa's dark eyes, the remnants of hesitation lingering like clouds before a storm. With a steady hand, she reached up, gently clasping his cheek, grounding him with the warmth of her touch. Their gazes locked, two hearts laying bare the vulnerability that had slowly woven itself between them. Clara searched for the man beneath the scars, a warrior faced with the choice between self-preservation and the call to fight for something worth holding on to. In that moment, she felt the stillness of the world fade around them, leaving only the soft cadence of their breath mingling in the quiet air. The sheriff's voice broke the silence once more, impatience tinged with authority as he demanded they step forward. Yet Clara remained steadfast, her hand still resting on Koa's cheek, a resolute promise conveyed in the silence. Koa released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension slowly unraveling as he came to terms with the truth Clara had spoken. Her loyalty, her willingness to stand firm against the storm, resonated deep within him, awakening the choice he had yet to make, the decision to remain, to stand against the tumultuous waves crashing against the shore of their fragile existence. With a quiet determination, Koa nodded, a subtle acceptance of the path they had forged together, a silent vow to stand his ground. The sheriff's brow furrowed as he watched the exchange, uncertainty creeping into his steely demeanor. Yet Clara held fast to Koa's side, their unwavering connection a beacon of defiance amidst the encroaching darkness. As they prepared to face the unknown, the weight of their choices bore heavy on their shoulders. But with hearts entwined, they stood ready to confront whatever lay ahead, together, two warriors bound against the tides of fate, unyielding and resolute. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows that intertwined on the dusty ground as Clara and Koa stood resolute against the advancing sheriffs. The tension in the air felt electric, a palpable reminder of the risks they faced together. Clara's heart raced, an urgent rhythm that pulsed with the weight of their choices. She looked into Koa's eyes, searching for the man beneath the layers of shame and fear, hoping to see the warrior who had chosen to fight alongside her, rather than yield to despair. The moment was fragile, teetering on the edge of uncertainty, yet their bond felt unbreakable, woven tightly in the fabric of their shared struggle. As the sheriff shifted uneasily on his horse, Clara felt Koa's hand tighten around hers, a gesture of solidarity that rippled through her like a quiet flame. They were two sides of the same coin, each carrying the scars of a past that sought to define them, but no longer could. The murmurs of the lawman around them faded into an indistinct chorus as Clara drew strength from Koa's presence. Silence enveloped them, thick with unspoken promises and daring hopes, their resolve knitting the space between them into a sanctuary amidst the looming chaos. The sheriff dismounted, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration as he shifted from authority to uncertainty, his eyes darting between them. Clara stepped forward, the warmth of Koa's hand anchoring her as she squared her shoulders, ready to confront the truth of their circumstances. "He is not a danger," she asserted, her voice steady against the rising wind. "He's a man shaped by courage and pain, just as I stand here shaped by loss and the will to protect this land." The weight of her words hung in the air, a quiet declaration that bridged the gap between her world and the one that had sought to condemn Koa. Koa's eyes remained fixed on the sheriff, but within them Clara saw the flicker of dignity beginning to emerge from the shadows of his past. He had weathered storms far worse than this, had fought against forces that sought to erase his existence. And in that moment, standing together in the face of those who would judge them, he found a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of exile no longer loomed over him. Instead, he stood taller, the fierce resolve of a warrior shining through the layers of hurt. Clara squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the power they held when united. Two souls refusing to be uprooted by the opinions of a world that had long disregarded their humanity. Just as the sheriff opened his mouth to speak, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the air, a cacophony of chaos as townsfolk began to gather, their curious gazes fixed upon the unfolding scene. Clara held firm, the swirling crowd of whispers becoming a backdrop to the quiet strength radiating from Koa beside her. They were no longer just a widow and an Apache warrior. They were a testament to resilience, a formidable force born out of the ashes of despair. Justice may come or it may not, but in this moment, truth stood bare before them, illuminating the choices made in the name of survival and honor. As Clara looked toward Koa, she saw a man transformed, a spirit rising from the depths of sadness, finding dignity in the face of judgment. The world beyond the fence was still rife with uncertainty, but within their shared silence, they had woven a tapestry of understanding that could not be unmade. She saw in him the reflection of her own lingering fears, but also the embers of hope that guided them both toward a new horizon, a life forged in connection rather than solitude. Koa's grip loosened around Clara's hand, and she noticed the flicker of decision in his eyes, the weight of exile beginning to dissipate like the morning mist. Together, they would face the reckoning. They would not abandon the sanctuary they had created amidst the chaos. Amidst the judgment of the townsfolk and the apprehension of the law, Koa found his place, not as an outlaw, but as a man deserving of honor, of a life worth fighting for. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they chose to embrace the uncertain future, ready to carve a path forward in their shared truth, no matter the outcome. The dawn broke softly over the homestead, casting a gentle glow across the land that had once been barren and desolate. Clara stood at the edge of the field, fingers brushing against the damp earth, feeling a tremor of hope surge through her veins as the first signs of life peeked through the soil. Koa knelt nearby, a determined focus drawing his brow tight as he worked the plow through the rich, dark loam. The air hummed with possibility, each furrow a testament to their shared labor, their unyielding resolve to breathe new life into the land they both called home. The garden was a canvas of vibrant greens, each sprouting leaf whispering promises of growth, a stark contrast to the lifelessness that had clung to the earth for so long. Clara smiled, the corners of her lips lifting in unguarded joy as she watched Koa move with fluid grace, his hands skillfully shaping the ground. This was no longer just her struggle. It was their bond, woven together through the sweat of their brows and the pulse of a shared heartbeat. The weight of yesterday's sorrows began to lift, replaced by the anticipation of what lay ahead. That evening, Clara prepared a humble meal, the scent of simmering vegetables filling the farmhouse with warmth. She laid the table with care, setting a wooden bowl in front of Koa, her heart light with gratitude. As they sat together, their silence spoke volumes, a quiet recognition of the journey they had embarked upon, transformed by the simple act of sharing sustenance. The flickering candlelight danced against the worn walls, casting gentle shadows that flickered like the hope nestled between them. Clara offered a piece of bread, her hands steady as they brushed against his, a connection that transcended words. Koa looked up, a spark of warmth in his dark eyes as he accepted the offering. Each bite they shared was a small victory, a communion of souls stitching together the fabric of their lives once frayed by despair. Clara observed him, the way he savored each morsel, the tension in his shoulders easing as time unfolded around them like the blossoming petals of the cornflowers outside. The weight of judgment that had once clung to them like a shroud began to dissipate, replaced by the glow of potential, the promise of renewal illuminating the dim corners of their hearts. After the meal, Koa moved to the well, the rhythmic sound of the bucket splashing into the cool water resonating in the stillness of the night. Clara followed him, her heart swelling with admiration as she watched him draw water, his movements fluid and confident. Together, they filled a pitcher under the moonlight, the cool liquid glistening as it poured. In that moment, the shackles of the past fell away, and Clara realized that their bond extended far beyond mere survival. It was a partnership rooted in nurturing possibilities, both for the land and for one another. As Koa turned to her, the sack he had worn since the auction finally lay discarded, a remnant of uncertainty now replaced by the strength of his presence. He smiled, the warmth of it igniting a spark deep within Clara. The shadows that had once held him captive began to recede, revealing a man who had fought against his demons and emerged ready to embrace the life they were building together. In the quiet space between them, Clara felt the pulse of their shared journey echo, a heartbeat that promised hope as the land blossomed anew, as did their own fragile yet resilient connection.